Welcome to this week's episode of Being Bookish. I'm your host, Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, long-term depression sufferer, and ex-coffee addict. As you may be able to tell, this week is different to my usual episodes, so let's get straight to the content you're here for. Well, first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the podcast. I know that things are really getting busy for you in the next couple of weeks with the promo tour across all the bookstores and everything, because it's your first book in 18 months is coming out next week in the US. Is it the first time your book has come out as a big release in the US?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
And Only Love Can Hurt Like This. And every time I hear the title, I hear the song.
Well, the song was what gave me the idea for the title, so that's a good thing.
So it's an appropriate. I think that every video I saw when people were talking about the book coming out, every video I saw had the soundtrack of Only Love Can Hurt Like This, and it really fits. So I've read the book, and actually I've now read it twice, and I absolutely loved it. So for everybody who hasn't read it yet, what's it about?
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, like twice is that's a really good sign. So this is a story of Ren, who at the beginning of the novel, in the prologue, she witnesses the moment that her fiance realizes that he's in love with someone else. And then you pick up with Ren in chapter one, and it's 3 months later, and she's still quite heartbroken, and she decides to go and spend some time with her dad and step family on their farm in Indiana, and and whilst there, she bumps into a very hot man called Anders, who is the brother of the farmer who lives on the farm next door. And it's like an old family farm. They've had it there for nearly 200 years. And Anders is home because his brother's, struggling with his mental health, and he's home sort of to support his brother. And he and Ren develops feelings for him. Like there's an instant attraction pretty much on her part. But he always sort of holds her at arm's length. And later you discover why. He's got this whole sort of secret, which is making it's an impossible love story, basically. It's an impossible situation, which, for them to overcome. And when Ren finds out what it is, and she's just absolutely, her head is blown.
I'm not. That's the thing. It is such a emotional twist. I mean, almost. I think every book has a twist in it, and this one is particularly emotionally devastating for everybody concerned. I'm not going to go into the plot twist because you need to read the book. But was it something that you had an idea for before you wrote the book, or was it something that happened as the characters developed?
I think the idea itself, like I've had, this book came of lots of different ideas, but that specific idea I had longer than any of the others. That idea, I actually got the idea for that. It was remembering, something that had happened when I spent some time in Indianapolis myself. The book is set in Indiana and Indianapolis. And, I spent some time there in my 20s. And I remember hearing about this scenario, that happens. And
Yeah.
I heard about it again in recent years, which, it happened to someone that, like a friend of mine, and she knows someone else who it happened to. And I just thought that scenario is just like, I cannot imagine a more heartbreaking scenario if you were part of a love story that had this situation at its
Yeah.
core. And it just, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And yeah, and when I was thinking about the title, and when I was thinking about the song, and Only Love Can Hurt Like This, or just like this would be the perfect fit, for those, for that scenario, and this title to come together. So yeah.
I mean, that particular twist, sometimes you can see them coming and you think, I need it to happen because this will build the story and it will develop. But when this happens, it's like it was sudden heartbreak, and you just feel so much of Ren's pain, but at the same time, you can understand where Anders is coming from. And I loved his brother as well, Jonas. He was
Oh.
incredible because he was, as you said, he has mental health issues, and they are obvious, and his ex-girlfriend was horrific, but I think she was meant to be. And you see his development. He is kind of helped by Ren's presence because he's so focused on Anders' issues, that his own kind of get not put away because that's unhealthy, but that he kind of is so focused on other people that he's not thinking about his own problems at the same time.
Yeah, I think Jonas is having he's sort of I mean, I've got such a soft spot for Jonas,
Yeah.
he's one of my favorite characters in the book, I really love him. At some stage, I'd love to, like, maybe write a spin-off story that has him, as the main character. Jonas Jonas's mental health is what has brought Anders home to the farm, and normally he wouldn't leave Indianapolis. He's a race engineer for an IndyCar team. It's the middle of the racing season. He normally would not be at home at all over the summer. He'd be too busy going to races and just
Yeah.
working full time. Um, so it's that, it's the fact that he has this, he's duty bound and honor bound to his family, and that, this care for his brother that brings him home. But it's interesting because you sort of find out later, that it wasn't always like that. It used to be the other way around, as they were growing up. Jonas is the older brother, and he would be the one who'd look after and take care of Anders, when they were
Yeah.
struggling with their dad and, growing up on the farm. And, you sort of find out later that maybe there's a little bit more of that going on than you realize, that Anders is struggling, and Jonas can see that. And, he certainly does go through. I mean, I've know people who, struggle with depression, and I know that it can be something that it doesn't necessarily hang over you like a dark cloud that is there permanently for, months and months and months. There are lighter moments, you can struggle with it. You can come through and you can go back into a dark phase. And, I was kind of aware as I was writing this that he kind of comes out of a very, very dark period really quite quickly over the space of the book. But I know that does happen. That you
Yep.
can kind of like come out and maybe go back in, and farming and depression. I mean, if depression is very, very common amongst farmers. I mean, it's got farming in it as a profession has got one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession, and so it's something that's really relevant, to him, because he's struggling with so many other, things to do with farming and family, and just his whole, livelihood is so dependent on so many other factors that have nothing that's not within his control. So that's one of the reasons. But I think having Anders come home is something that really, really helps him. So it does lift that dark cloud around him, reasonably quickly. And it's really lovely to see his joyful side, and, see the brothers kind of the banter. And I love this book. I mean, I absolutely loved writing it, like the sort of the banter between Ren with her sister Bailey, who she doesn't know very well, before this summer, because she's her half sister, and they grew up on other sides of different countries,
Yeah.
and then also Anders and Jonas. It's just so lovely being able to write about the banter and the the friendship that develops between the four of them.
And of course, we have Bailey, who's relatively newly married with her husband, who is in the beginning, it's almost as though there's that sense that she's not as satisfied and happy having uprooted herself to move to where his family is, with her family also uprooting. And she doesn't seem to be as steady. And that is something that really comes across when Ren turns up and she's trying to build a bond that she hasn't previously had with her sister. So the dynamics between them is really interesting to read.
Oh, good. I'm glad you found it interesting. I found it really interesting just to explore, because, I always had the title in my mind as I was writing this book. It's not just about Ren and how she feels for Anders. It's about how she felt about her fiance, and what happens at the beginning of the story. And on top of that, it's this whole dynamic with her family. She grew up in Bury St. Edmunds mostly. Like she was actually born in Phoenix, Arizona, and spent the first 5 or 6 years of her life living in America. And I could write about that from experience because I spent some time there as well, and then her father had an affair with a woman who fell pregnant with Bailey, and Ren's mother sort of packed her up and took her back home to the UK. So Ren basically grows up, and she says at the beginning, she's like, and Bailey got to grow up with my dad as her own. So she
Yeah.
had her dad for 5 years, and then basically Bailey had her dad for the rest of her, sort of childhood and teenage years, and now Ren's, in her early 30s, and she really doesn't know her dad that well. She certainly doesn't know Bailey that well. Like, the last time they saw each other was about 5 years ago when Bailey was 22. There's a 6-year age gap between them. Um, and so that was a really nice dynamic to sort of explore, because also Ren has certain preconceptions about, she thinks that her family are thinking certain things of her, and actually the fact is they don't really know her that well either. And so it was really lovely to kind of unpack that, and get them to, get to know each other and, realize that they might have been reading each other a bit wrong in the past, and, to build that sort of sisterly bond, was really lovely. I'm not sure I haven't done that as much in other books before. Usually there's a friendship there or something, but in terms of an actual
Yeah.
sisterly bond, this was a new dynamic really.
Yeah, that's I think the only other time you have that, uh, kind of confusion of relationship between father and daughter is in my favorite one, If You Could Go Anywhere, where
Okay.
Alice
Yeah.
first meets her father when she's an adult, having not
Yes.
been aware of his existence, or being aware of his existence, obviously, but not actually having ever met him before. And there
Yeah,
were a
that's
lot of
strange.
preconceptions and assumptions going on with the relationship as it should be and as they want it to be. And I think
Absolutely.
that's what
Yeah.
happens with Bailey and Ren in some way. There's that assumption, "Oh, they don't want me here. They resent me," especially Cheryl, and it's not that way at all.
And I loved, some of the moments that really moved me were actually the moments between Cheryl and her stepmother. Sorry, Ren and her stepmother,
Yeah.
Cheryl. When Ren kind of, Cheryl realizes. Anyway, I don't want to spoil it for the readers because I think
No.
that's a lot kind of like, again, sort of how that unfolds. That whole family dynamic. I think is, this book. I describe it as it was definitely a slow burn. I'd say, because there's quite a lot of this family stuff in there as well, and maybe the first sort of quarter or first third, it takes a little while to get going with Renan and Anders because he has to keep her at arm's length for a reason. Like
Yeah.
there's a reason that he can't kind of. So while she has this instant attraction towards him, you can't. I couldn't write in too much chemistry or too much sort of flirty banter or anything like that because there's a reason he's keeping her. Why he can't move things forward. And so, there is kind of that family dynamic and unfolding, in the earlier stages of the book too. And then it's kind of becomes very much, Ren and Anders, So if you're really looking for a romance, any of your listeners who are listening to this, if you want like a real romance, then just know that that's coming.
That's the slow burn's always good though. I like did you when you were writing this, did you actually ever have to go through and go, "No, that can't happen yet," and scroll out masses of paragraphs and things because
No.
you'd had the instinct?
Yeah, no, I didn't actually. In fact, it was the other way around. Like I had it in my head. This was the first book that I've ever had to write like this, where every other one of my books, there's always this moment, there's this electricity, there's another reason which might keep them apart, but you can really sort of feel the banter and the chemistry between the characters. But with this one, because I knew that Anders could not allow himself to have feelings for Ren, and so it was hard to write about it one-sided, and I didn't want her to be too kind of like not reading the signs or just and she's not a girly girl or she's not sort of too she's not heavily romantic herself. She's a bit more sort of head, she's an architect and just sort of a little bit more kind of like straight minded and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of when I wrote it like the way that I felt was realistic. And then I remember my editor, my American editor in particular, saying, I want a bit more chemistry here. I want more chemistry here. And I'm so, so glad she told me to do that because, now there is more chemistry in those earlier moments. But, it was the other way around, rather than me holding back, if anything, I had to give more, to just sort of start building those moments and, sort of pushing it forward with the reader.
That's the charm with a slow burn, though. You've got the opportunity to add in the slow but subtle build, and that's something that really comes across in this book.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I absolutely loved having that opportunity to do that. And, usually I write my books quite quickly and I have the reason there's been an 18-month turnaround for this one is not because I wrote the book. I've still been writing a book a year, but we basically decided, well, to have a pause between my publishing to give me a year and a half and my publisher a year and a half to really sort of build, buzz for the book and, get it into lots of hands and make sure there are proof copies going out to loads of people and, to really, really sort of build and, try and, have a big splash upon publication. But that did also enable me to have a bit more time to be able to edit the book, because there wasn't this, usually I deliver the book and within like 3 to 4 months it's out on the shelves, it's so, so quick. And my editing process is like 2 week turnaround, and then it's like super, super fast. So actually to have like a couple of months to be able to come back to it and build, I personally think it's the most I personally think it's the most polished book that I've written to date, just in terms of when I can read it through and, and sort of see the character development. I think it's yeah, the most polished just because I've had a bit more time. So
That's the thing you were saying, that you had a lot longer and normally you do a very, very fast turnaround. I was reading an article that you'd written or an essay for Novelicious, where you were talking about the writing process and how you had Lucy in the Sky was a really quick turnaround, your first book.
yes, they've all been really quick turnarounds. And one day I'll tell you just how fast I wrote the last book that I've just delivered.
But I saw you posting, "I've written the last
Oh,
page," and it's like, "Huh?"
oh my God, honestly. I think about my books for a long time before I come to write them, and they are so, so real inside my head. Like they are just as clear as, I know exactly what's going to happen when, and by the time I come down to write, I'm really generally very, very clear. I know how it's going to end. I have all these big scenes that are just, crystal clear in my head.
Yeah,
But it takes me a while to kind of like get going with the writing, and then eventually I'll just hit like my stride. And often that happens in the last month, sometimes in the last 2 weeks, as in the last, with the last book. And I just like the words just come pouring out of me, like just, really, really can't stop writing. So yeah, usually, but even when I'm not under that pressure, it tends to take me about 3 months to write a book. But it will usually take me like 2 months to write half of the book. This is a general thing, and it will take me a month to write another half of the book, so that's how it's been in the past. I'm pushing it even further these days, like I'm sort of writing even more in the last month. And I don't know, I feel so, so, so connected to my books when I'm writing them quickly. Like I'm completely living inside the character's head. I think that's why I really do feel it all along with the characters. I mean, I'm I'm sobbing at the moments where my characters are sobbing, like I'm
yeah.
like so, I'm feeling like jittery and goosebumpy and stuff, when there's a sexy moment going on or something like that. I'm just completely feeling everything that they're feeling. And definitely writing the books quickly means I'm literally living inside that world with them, for those last, few weeks. I'm just completely immersed in their story. And yeah, that's just my process.
It's a nice process to have, though. I think it takes me when I remember writing essays for college, and I was the complete reverse. I would be writing the first part for, a week, and I'd write the last 25% in about 3.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is partially down to procrastination. Would you say that because of the way that you write, you don't procrastinate at all, or do you sit there and have to force yourself for the first part of the book?
I very rarely force it because I really wanna feel it, like I the days that I feel quite sort of a bit blue, and a bit sort of like really dejected are the days when I've not managed to write very much, and it's been because I haven't really felt it. And funnily enough, when I go back and read those paragraphs later, that they're perfectly fine. Like they don't read like I haven't felt it, but I haven't felt it, so I don't enjoy the process. And I love writing, like, and when I'm writing in those last few weeks, and I'm completely feeling it, I'm so happy, and when I come in, I've like achieved a lot of words. So I wouldn't say that I procrastinate, and also just the fact that it takes me, maybe 3 months to sit there, and I'll spend each day, every day, I'll go down and I'll sit and try and write, and obviously I'm doing a lot of social media and stuff like that, and trying to stay on top of things like that as
Yeah,
well. But I'm really immersed in the writing world, but it might be quite slow, and it might feel a little bit like in those earlier stages, it might feel like I'm having to think about every sentence. And whereas at the end, I'm not thinking at all, like it's just flying out of me. It's just completely, you know, I
instinct.
can't type fast enough. And then the rest of the year, I'm doing research for months. I'm publicizing the book before, I'm doing around like several rounds of editing, so I'm basically working all the time. So there's not a lot of room for procrastination.
A
You know,
writer's
it's
job is 24/7,
yeah.
365 days a year by the sound of things.
Yeah, like literally, when I finish, I do take the summer off because and when I've got the kids home, I don't tend to work hardly at all because that's just too difficult. Like
Yeah,
I need to be able to lose myself in my story, and if there's the kids around, I want to be there and I want to, be mum and stuff like that. Then I can't completely lose myself. Um, so and I do find it really, really hard to write in the summer months. My head just feels like full of cotton wool and I get hay fever and I just feel really foggy and I just not clear. I find that autumn
yeah.
and winter are the best times to write. I can't remember where I was going with that.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you're writing in the autumn and winter, a lot of your stories have a very summer focus. So it must be quite nice to have that. I'm thinking about the sunrise and it's beautifully warm outside, even though there's 2 inches of snow on the ground and it's freezing cold.
Yeah, it's a nice escape. I mean, the only downside about it is that during the time when I'm writing, like it would be lovely if I could go back and have another research trip, or I would love to be able to, if I'm writing, because I have to do so much research about just like things like what flowers would be on the ground at that time of year that I'm writing about. And sometimes I just be like, oh God, if only I was there writing about this right now. But that
Yeah.
never happens because I'm always writing in the autumn and winter and summer has already gone. So, you know, I mean, obviously I've been to the place probably in the summer and taken photographs and stuff, but I would love to be able to sit there and actually write in it. But obviously it would be a completely different time of year. Like I thought about going back to Indianapolis and Indiana, and I was just thinking it's going to be like a foot in snow right now. There's no point. I'm not
This
going to see
winter,
like
probably a bit more.
yeah, I'm not going to see like the cornfields and stuff. I'm not going to the fireflies. Like I needed to have gone there in July and August to be able to do that. So yeah, I make do with
All
what
of
I can.
yeah, all of the places you write about are, even if you're writing about, Cambridge or Oxford or Bury St Edmunds, it's all, there is a kind of romantic veil over it, which is really lovely to read,
Oh,
because
good.
obviously reality is not quite so nice.
Well, I mean, I write about places as much as I can from being there in reality. But yeah, you're right. Like I am seeing the best of places. I'm writing about them because, ultimately, I mean, on the whole, my characters are having a nice time there, like on
Yeah,
the whole, they're there during summer or, they're there sort of experiencing like the best part of that world, or I'm writing a lovely scene. So, you know, um, I guess if in the scenes where my characters might be really miserable or when the setting might be absolutely revolting, then they're thinking about their emotions and stuff. They're not thinking about what they're seeing so much. So, it tends to be in those uplifting moments, like, with The Minute I Saw You, which is also in Cambridge and Grantchester, around near where I live. And, just being able to write about, those sort of picturesque, river settings and the pubs and stuff like that, and punting on the river and things, all of that stuff usually takes place on a nice sunny day, like that's the sort of thing that you sort of seek out on a nice British sunny day, and so yeah, writing about that from experience and just thinking about what it was that I saw. But yeah, I do tend to
yeah,
pick the best of places when I'm writing about them. But also, I feel like a sense of responsibility because if I'm writing, I always write about real places. And so if I'm writing about a real place, I don't want to like be pulling it apart. I'd have to, I actually tend to sort of avoid that, like
you'd
if
have the
I,
tourist board contacting you and complaining.
yeah,
That
absolutely.
that wouldn't do so good. I don't think that would be a great thing for a newspaper article. "This author ripped us apart."
Yeah, I might avoid that.
Yeah, that's always a dread. I think that's always a dread. I write articles for work, and the first thing I think is, "Are they going to not like what I said?" I used to write about cars, and I even got contacted by Bloomberg because I'd written something about BMW. I was like,
Oh,
"Oh,
really? Oh,
yes."
wow.
It's like, I feel uncomfortable now. I don't want to be asked any more questions."
Oh.
It's what I think, it's one of those things that you want to be making things look the best that you can, and all of the places that you write about. I mean, I've never been, as much as I want to, I've never been to Cambridge, and obviously that's featured in a few of your novels.
Yes, yeah, the first time I wrote about it was in One Perfect Summer, and we had moved to Cambridge at the point in the story that I was writing about, Alice moving to Cambridge. So that was that, I've always described that as a magical, and I can't think of a better word because, whenever I do book research, whenever I go to places to research them, I feel like I live there, like I'm imagining living there, and when I leave, I feel sad. I feel like I've, taken a piece of that place with me. And if I ever go back again in the future, I actually sort of feel this weird kind of melancholy because I'm like, really feeling so connected to the books and feeling like what the character felt like as they were there. It was really sort of strange. Um, I feel kind of sad, to
Yeah.
return. I'm never going to feel more than that with the next book that I've just finished writing, which is set in St Agnes in Cornwall, and I feel like such a wrench every time I think of the place. And we're going back there soon. I know that it's going to be quite hard to go back and be there and remember the story that what has happened there. It's a really weird kind of phenomenon. But with Cambridge, I live here, so I could write about it, and then I got to stay. And so every time I walk over the bridges, and see the colleges, I can almost imagine, Alice and Joe still living here, and it makes me, makes you sort of feel full of joy. And then the same with the minute I saw you actually being able to write about another part of Cambridge and Grantchester. Again, I was able to write about places that I actually go to myself. So that just brought me so much happiness because I get to live in this beautiful place that I've written about.
That's the thing. I mean, uh, in Alice and Joe's story, Cambridge is almost a character on its own because there's so much about it, the walks, the bridges, the punting and everything else that makes it really come alive for even for people who've never been there.
Oh, well, that's great. I mean, that's what I wanted, and certainly, like I say, just I could really throw my heart and soul into that research because, you know, like I say, I just moved here, so it was really, really nice to be able to learn quite a lot about the history and get to see behind the scenes of the colleges, and just sort of I still remember so much of the research, and it's yeah, I recommend it. I recommend sort of like doing research on your own hometown, like it just brings it to life.
I live in a town on the coast, so we have quite a lot of history here
Yeah,
and
amazing.
beaches with lots of pebbles, which they
Yes.
put in purely because of flood protection. It used to have a
Oh,
sandy
really?
beach, so
No way. How
yes.
interesting.
I live in Sussex, so
Oh, wow.
at some point you can base a book down here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Travelling along the coast to Devon or Cornwall.
Oh, nice.
That's it, that I mean, you have written so many characters that are larger than life, but at the same time incredibly real. If someone said to you, "We're going to make a film or a miniseries," say Netflix came to you and said, "We're gonna make a film or a miniseries," and you can pick the book, would you automatically know which one you'd go for, or would it be a case of thinking about it for a very long time before just doing an sort of one potato, two potato?
Um, I think all of my books would work on screen, like just from the concepts that they've got, and how vivid they look inside my head and the locations. I think they would work, really nicely on screen.
Absolutely.
I've thought about this a few times, and I'd love to see Chasing Daisy as a film. I think that'd be because I love Formula One, and I can really imagine that doing, especially with Netflix Drive to Survive and stuff. But I also think that the Johnny B. Good series, because that is a series, and there's so much scope for where it goes and what happens. With you finding out that he's eventually got a teenage daughter and, what
And the
happens with her.
series Jessie Jefferson afterwards.
Yeah, I can really sort of see that as like a mini series which just kind of continues. And I would love to see that continue because I don't feel like I've got the time to come back to their story, but I so want to see what happens to them. And I would love that to, kind of continue with someone else writing it and taking it further because, I've got all these different ideas and yeah, but I just in terms of finding the time to sit down and write anymore, it's been almost impossible. Um, I'd love to see Only Love Can Hurt Like This on the screen. I think this one would work really beautifully. I can really picture it.
That'd
Um,
be a wonderful I think this one would be a really good film
yeah, I think
because
it'd
of
be
the
great.
location as well.
Yeah, and I think my next one I can really really see. Like I can't wait to tell readers about that one.
This is mean.
Anyway. Oh dear.
It's always that way though. The minute you've do you always, as you said, you've written, you're always working. So when you were finishing Only Love Can Hurt Like This, were you already in the planning stages for the next book?
Yes, I was. But the weird thing is because of the way I used to work with my old publisher, when I used to write a book, deliver a book, edit the book, and the book would come out. Then I'd publicize that book, and then I'd start thinking about the next one. So I was in like this lovely sort of, year-long circle where it's all about the one book, and then I'm on to the next one. And that was really contained. And that's actually very unusual. Like normally it works the way that I'm currently working, which is you write a book, you edit the book, you and then you publicize the book before that. So so what I've done with this one, for example, is that I wrote Only Love Can Hurt Like This a whole year ago. It was all edited, a year ago. And in the meantime, after that, I've gone on and I've written another book and I'm in the editing process of the other book at the
Wow.
moment. And Only Love Can Hurt Like This is coming out. So, so I'm my head is very, very full of my new characters. And, but it's actually really lovely because I'm bringing it back out now and I'm actually just rereading Only Love Can Hurt Like This at the moment. And, and just feeling so connected again to Ren and Anders and their story. And because I'm obviously going to be talking about it a lot now for the next few weeks.
Absolutely.
And so it's lovely to sort of get back into, thinking about Only Love Can Hurt Like This, but it's also slightly strange because I also just want to shout to you all about, I can't wait for you to meet, Finn and Liv and Tom, wait till you meet them. You're going to go crazy for them, like they're going to break your heart. so, so it's really hard, to sort of just be juggling them both. But, ultimately, yeah, that is normal.
Well, that's a nice promise, though. They're going to break your heart is a lovely promise for romantic readers.
God, honestly, this that book, oh my God, it just killed me. I just oh dear.
When
Anyway,
you reread Only Love Can Hurt Like This, did you read it as a reader or did you read it as the writer?
I read this book so many times, like so many more times than I had to read any of my other books in the past because I went through rounds of editing with my UK editor. Then I got an American editor, went through some more rounds of editing with her. Had two different copy edits, two different sort of type, like page proofs, because the American page proofs as well as the British. So I have read it so many times, and every time I've read it, I've read it as a reader. I genuinely have. I mean, obviously, I see things, that I might think, oh, I can tweak that, or I'd like to change that. And even now on this reread, I'm sort of like, oh, I wish I put that sentence above that one, just like there's the odd little thing. But on the whole, I can kind of forget that I wrote them and I can just enjoy the journey because, I loved writing this book. So, as long as I'm connected to it and really enjoying the writing process, then it should follow that I enjoy reading it, because ultimately I'm going on the same journey with them. I'm just not having to get the words out of my head onto paper. I can just now just enjoy the journey that I've constructed. But, as I say, they feel so real to me before I even come to write them that, that's just basically how I'm remembering it. I will still read things like if I read my old books now, I'll be like, oh, I quite like that sentence. And I'll just completely have forgotten that I wrote it myself, just like a way of sort of saying something, yeah, it's weird. It's very weird. I know, yeah. I know obviously it's different for everyone. I know a lot of other authors who can't stand to read their own work. What I find difficult is listening to the audiobook. And I haven't listened to any of my audiobooks. I've only listened to tiny snippets. And I find that hard because um, intonation will be put on a different and in a different way than I would
Yeah.
have said it. So I hear things in my head and I know exactly how the characters are speaking. And then, it'll be sort of said slightly differently. And obviously that's the case for everyone who reads my books. They're reading it and they're putting their own intonation on them. But it has made me think, oh my God, if my books ever were made into a film, it would be a nightmare. You know, I think I'd find it really, really hard because they feel so, so real to me as books that to actually see somebody else take them to and like to lose control in that sense and, have an actor or actress put their own spin on, different words and stuff, which it would be very hard. I'd have to totally, totally let go of that book.
Do you
So
ever
yeah.
cast them with actors and actresses you've seen as you're creating the actual book, or do you not do that just because you'd be losing an element of control?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's more just they don't look like anyone inside my head. Like they look like fictional characters. So while I might have seen like a celebrity and thought, oh, I like his hair or, I like his dimples or something like that, and I might write a character who's got dimples, like one of my new characters got dimples and, and I sort of like, but then I'll be thinking, oh, I'm imagining their eyes and they're totally different. And now inside my head, like Anders, I can see him so, so clearly and he looks like nobody in the world, like it would be really hard to cast him. That's why casting directors are so good at their jobs, I have since sort of thought, "Oh, that actor could make a good Anders, or, that one could make a, good Anders," but, like, yeah.
Elements. I'll take his dimples, his eyes.
Yeah, it's hard.
I think that's what Pinterest is so useful for.
Yes, yeah, I don't go on Pinterest that much. It'd be good to go on there a little bit more. I'd love to do a few reels and things like that, with the inspiration, but yeah, that's just another element of social media that I probably can't take on because I'm already struggling to stay on top of like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
That's it. You do all of your own socials,
Yes.
and, as someone who does theirs as well, it is incredibly time consuming, and you produce a lot for social.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, I might not post anything for a week, like it just depends on whether or not I've got content that I want to share. Obviously, at the moment, I've got quite a lot of content because the book's coming out. So,
Yeah.
and I've got, really great American and really great UK publisher who are giving me some really fantastic graphics and different sort of things that I can use, I can post online. So that's been really helpful. So yeah, I'm busier than ever at the moment on social media, and that's not going to let up anytime soon because when the book comes out, and I really love to reply to my readers, but I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep that up. But I'll certainly try as long as I possibly can to reply to every person.
With your, you said that you've got obviously you had American edits and UK edits. Does that mean that the 2 copies of the book are different, or did you integrate the comments from both editors into one finalized version of the book?
Yeah, I integrated them all. Like they're all the same, apart from American's got Americanized spelling, so they've got I's, like Z instead of as S. Um, and there might be just a couple of really minor things, where Americans use feet and yards, and it might have felt more comfortable to me because obviously in Britain we use feet and yards and in the metric system, so
Yeah.
it's not a big deal to be interchangeable. But I think there's like one instance where I was like, oh, I think that reads better as meters. So I'm just going to leave it as meters for the UK edition. And I just changed the American. So there's just like a couple of really small things like that. And it might be couch instead of sofa, for example. And, just like a couple of things like that. But it's anyone reading it, I would be surprised if they could notice any differences.
I was gonna say we're quite flexible, I think, over here with that specific terminology like sweater and sneaker
Yeah.
and everything
Yeah.
else. We didn't
Yeah.
used to be.
I mean, one of the weird things was sort of writing American dialogue because, like, and I think I might have just changed it and kept the UK for this because, for example, over here we say Lego. My character Ren, when she was a child, she used to build
Yes.
houses out of bricks. She's an architect, and so over here we say Lego, but in America they say Legos. And so they put less on the end, and, her dad says, "I remember when we had a whole bag full of Legos." And I sort of thought, "Oh, that is gonna read really weird for a UK audience," if
Yes.
they're gonna think that's a typo. So I think for the UK one, I took the S off, just so that I'd rather it didn't stand out to them, but, in America, it's correct for Americans, so
That is a
so
really random one.
I
Lego
know,
and Legos. I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a few little things like that. Like I before the book went to American editors, before it went out, like for sale in America, I have a really great American friend who read the book for me. So she was the one who was kind of like helping me with the dialogue and just making sure it was things that, Americans would say, the same sort of terminology and stuff, because it is slightly different. You'd be surprised at how many differences there are, but they're all really subtle.
Yeah, I imagine so. I think that's one of the things that we don't notice so much because when I think a large number of American published books are printed the same over here as they are in the US, whereas I think there's a difference when books are published over here and in the US. At least
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
noticed that when I've purchased books in the US,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
which
It's
isn't
quite
which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, and I think Americans are quite used now to reading, reading sort of more British sort of books and more British Britishisms and stuff like that in there. So it is very flexible. I think it's certainly not jarring. I don't think I think it feels really smooth when you're reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. With obviously Ren and Anders, you've now got, I think it's 16 full-length adult contemporary romance and 13 YA, and obviously all your short stories. Do you have a favorite couple or pair of characters? Or is it every single book creates a new just a new member of the family to say, "I love these people."
I definitely love, like, every character, and I feel like I still know all of my main characters inside out, like, I remember their stories so, so well, I remember what they've been through, and what makes them tick, it's kind of nuts to me. I was only thinking about this the other day that I've just written about, 2 more leading men in the last book,
Mm,
and I'm just head over heels in love with them. And, I mean, I literally have had a love story with each of my characters, as I'm writing them, like, so in love with Anders, like, he's just, I just adore him. Um, the characters who I remember at the time sort of writing the book and sort of saying, I think they're my favorite characters were Hannah and Sunny from The Minute I Saw You.
mm,
And maybe it's partly because that book is set in Cambridge where I live, so I felt very connected to that story. But they go through, I would say that's my lightest and my darkest book rolled into one. Like, there's so much sort of chemistry between them, and they try to be friends, but Sunny's like sworn off sex, so there's not gonna happen, nothing's gonna happen between them. Um, but then the darkness, about his past and what, the reason that he's kind of come to this,
yeah,
this reasoning is really dark. So they go through such a sort of journey together that I will always have such a really, really big soft spot for them. And Bridget, I think, has always been one of my favorite female characters. Like, I just loved her, thought she was so fun. She's someone I really want to be friends with. But I'd love each and every one of them. Like, there's not a single one of my characters who I'm like, "Ooh, yeah, could leave him, take him or leave him," or
or at
the
least
girls,
the main
really.
characters. There are a few characters that you've created, I think, at least as a reader, I've read them and gone, "Didn't like that person," but I think you're not
Yeah.
meant to.
Yeah, no, well, certainly that's the case with, I'm talking about, like, my main characters,
Yeah,
like, inside, like, I'm living inside the heroine's head as that heroine is falling in love with the hero, like, so,
yeah, absolutely.
um, some of them are really badly flawed, like Johnny Jefferson, for example. I mean, it amazes me how much my readers absolutely love him
But
because
everybody
he's
loves a
so
flawed hero.
I know, well, he's very flawed, but he does come good, obviously, but not maybe not as quickly as some people would like. But yeah, I've got a soft spot for all of them. It's really hard not to be. But yes, obviously there are villains and villainesses throughout, especially with my young adult series. Like, I remember sort of writing in the Johnny Jefferson series, like Dana, like
Yeah.
Johnny's girlfriend in the second book, Baby Be Mine. Like, she's, oh, horrendous, and it's quite fun writing a villain.
That I think that's it though, isn't it? It's one of those you have to take the rough with the smooth with all of these books and all of these characters. And one of the things that I've noticed and I loved about your books is the fact that even subtly in some cases, there are Easter eggs and they're linked. Was that something you've planned out and you've got a massive, great big map somewhere that you plot and you go, right, that character I'm gonna use them? Or is it something that just happens because they're in the situation when you're writing it?
Firstly, can I just apologise for the meow? My cat has come and sat on the windowsill now, and she's looking at me, and she'll probably meow again.
That's okay. My cat's in the kitchen waiting for me to feed her.
Yes, so in terms of the linking of the characters, that's a tricky one. The reason I first started doing that was because I loved reading Marion Keyes's Walsh Sisters, and I remember, reading Watermelon and then reading Rachel's Holiday and getting like this little mention of Claire and Adam and just being
Mm,
so loving it so much. The fact that this world was still kind of existing, outside of my imagination, and so that made me really happy to read that. And then with my so when I was writing Lucy in the Sky, I remember thinking, oh, I'd love to be able to mention them again. I was editing Lucy in the Sky at the time, about to start writing Johnny Be Good. And I was just like, oh, I wish there was some way of kind of linking them. And I remember thinking, well, actually, Lucy's stepbrother's girlfriend is such a minor character. Like, she's there, she's mentioned, you know what she looks like, you know what her name is, but she could be the main character of my next book. And then that gives, you know, us a chance to just hear about, Lucy and Nathan, and just sort
Yeah.
of, she had this phone conversation where we actually get a mention of them. So that was kind of, that was really nice to include that. And I've just done that ever since. In terms of a map, yes, have had readers who've done maps for me. I've got this lovely reader, Pernil, who actually sent me a giant magnetic board with all these magnets, for them all to link. And but honestly, it does my head in when I look at it. There are so many linking characters. So it's just funny. Someone will just kind of push forward to the forefront, and I'll think, I'd love to include them. And even in Only Love Can Hurt Like This, there's a mention of a Chasing Daisy character, and there's also a mention of such a small bit part character, but like the architect that Meg works for at the beginning of the book as her PA is mentioned in this book. Like she's actually an architect who Ren went to work for. So it's such a small little Easter egg. Like you just most people would not see it. But it gives me a bit of pleasure, to sort of mention it. And obviously, Anders, as he works for an IndyCar team as a race engineer,
Yeah.
there's a mention there about Luis Castro, who's like the Chasing Daisy, and what he's kind of up to and stuff. So it's nice to be able to include those, because I do think about all these characters just going on and living their own sort of like lives in this parallel universe that exists with all of them in
Yeah, and
it.
also, of course, there are the short stories that you've done, the novellas that kind of they don't exactly close off the story, but they give you another insight, like an extra epilogue.
Yes, I loved being able to do those. And interestingly, those three novellas, like the first one I wrote was for One Perfect Summer. And I remember the book had come out, and I remember lots of readers saying that you can't leave it there, I want a sequel. And then my publisher just saying to me, there's this new thing, there's, ebook short stories. We'd love you to do an ebook short story sequel to One Perfect Summer. And that was amazing, like to be able to write a little bit more of that without having to write a whole sequel, because I already had the idea for The Longest Holiday, and that was the book that I really wanted to write. So yeah, so I didn't want to kind of like write an entire book, but just to be able to sort of go on and finish it. And then the other one that I did was 13 Weddings. I wrote a sequel to that, and again, that book left my readers the most torn, about in terms of who they wanted the heroine to end up with. And so yeah, so again, that was the one that readers were really crying out to hear a bit more of it. And I had to wait. I waited about 4 years before I wrote the sequel to that one, because I was just like, you know, enough time needs to go under enough water needs to go under the bridge before I can come back to that story. And then of course there's Johnny, Johnny Jefferson and Baby Be Mine. Again, readers had to wait 3 years for that sequel, because I needed to be in the right frame of mind to come back to it. And then, there's just so much more scope for that story with,
And then, of
with
course,
what,
you have Johnny's Girl, and then
yes.
all of the Jessie Jefferson series as well.
Yeah,
So you
history.
their story was kind of you got the continuation. I loved, One Perfect Summer, and the closure that you got with their story with Joe and Alice was wonderful, because they'd been through so much, and there had been so much disruption in the characters' lives to get to where they ended up. So it was
Yeah,
nice seeing that it did work out, rather than that doubt, because sometimes it
yeah,
fades to black and you think, "Oh, did it really work?"
yeah. Like that was my most unsatisfying ending I think that I've ever written. And at the time, it didn't feel like it was unsatisfying. At the time, I was just like, "Oh, yeah, there's my ending," and kind of left it. But now when I read them together, I would love to have like one day for One Perfect Summer to be reprinted together with One Perfect Christmas, because I think that you really do need One Perfect Christmas to finish it off.
Yeah, I think that when I read them, I do read them together, so that you
Yeah, yeah,
get the end that really you feel that it needed.
yeah,
But it was also
absolutely.
nice, I mean, they were an Easter egg as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, they crop up, and I loved writing them into The Minute I Saw You. And I think A Christmas Wedding, which is a sequel to 13 Weddings, is one of my favorite stories I've ever written, because that includes so many characters of my backlist.
Yeah.
It brings together so many different stories. I remember someone saying to me, "You just needed Johnny Jefferson to go to the wedding, and then you would have had, like those characters in there too." But I was
That's
like,
it. I
"No."
think 13 Weddings was the one where it really becomes clear that they're so interlinked.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Certainly the sequel, like I say, I think that has almost everyone in there. which is fun.
Now you've finished, obviously you finished and you're now in the editing cycle with the next book. Are you already planning out the next one?
Yes. I am. That's very much coming together inside my head at the moment. Yeah, I've just it's gonna be set in Wales actually. So I've got like 2 research plans to Wales, like planned for the next few months. And yeah, I'm just like it's coming together. It's still a work in progress. Like I've got a general idea, but I'm still, building on the characters and just working out exactly what their plans will be. So I would hope to have all of that completely ready to go for September when I start writing.
Oh, wow. And are you so you do your obviously you do your research trips. Are you a big planner with a notebook or do you have loads of files and maps and everything else on a computer?
I have a notebook, yeah, and most of it's in my head. Like it really genuinely is inside my head. It's like crazy, crazy inside there with all the juggling that's going on.
So you're not like the character in the last piece of my heart.
No,
The
not.
the author who sadly passes away and her sequel book is almost planned out in her journal.
Yes, no, I'm not like her at all.
Is that why you created her like that?
I think I was just, yeah. I mean, she needed to be like that because of the way things work out with Bridget having to
Yeah.
take over her story and finish writing it. So Bridget needed to have some clues as to where to take it and how to go. But yeah, that's not me. You won't like if I, you know, if something happened to me, you would not find like the answers in there in any of my notebooks. It's very much inside my head. Like that'd be it. It'd go with me to my grave.
Oh, don't say that. That reminds me of the Melissa Nathan.
Oh, don't. Yeah. Oh no, don't.
I
Oh.
remember reading her last book and getting it from the bookshop and opening it up and reading the front page where it said, "Sadly, she passed away," and it was like I was standing in the center of town in tears
Oh.
because all I could think was, "But that means no more books."
Yeah, I know.
It was
Yeah,
so I mean, that was incredibly tragic, and that in a way made me think of it because obviously that was it. There was nothing else after that, and you think, it's amazing that this is it, that there is no more.
I know.
Because some people are just that creative, everything is in their heads, the characters, the creation in general, the entire plot line with just, "This is where I'm basing it," on the
Yeah.
notebook.
Well, the idea for The Last Piece of My Heart, which is the one we're talking about at the moment with,
Yeah,
Bridget, actually came because I was in the car, I was riding The Sun in Her Eyes, and I was approaching, like, the bushfire scene, which is a really, really
yeah.
kind of key moment in the book, and it's, like, something really explosive happens in it, and I just couldn't wait to write the scene, and I was driving to an event, and we had a couple of near misses in the car, like, I'm not a very sort of good backseat passenger anyway. But, my friend was driving and I was just thinking, "God, if I died now, I'd be so angry, like, not being able to finish this book." And I was thinking, "Oh, imagine if my publisher, like, drafted in a ghostwriter to finish writing my book. I'd come back and haunt them if they didn't get the chemistry right." And I remember sort of, like, telling the story to my friend and her husband. Her husband's really creative, and he was just like, "Ghostwriter, that's the title for the book," And I thought, "Well, okay, I'm not gonna write a thriller, but going on, in the future." Yeah, I basically sort of realized that story in itself would be a good story to tell as romantic fiction, an author kind of, another writer coming along and having to finish, the book that's left behind by a late author. So yeah, that is the story for The Last Piece of My
Yeah,
Heart.
and I mean, the story behind that and obviously the relationship that builds for Bridget and everything else is incredibly moving to the
Yeah.
backdrop, to the backstory of everything that's happening in the book that she's writing.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So that was really sad. But then I like a book that makes me cry.
Oh. Well, yeah, I
Is
mean,
that
somehow
weird?
it make me cry, but no, I think so long as that's still uplifting too, like I don't wanna write I don't write sad stories, they're not sad stories at
No.
all, they're happy stories and they're full of hope and they're very uplifting, but there will be a sad moment in there, or there'll be some emotional moment in all of my books that will kind of tug at your heartstrings and, ultimately, you want the readers to, you want the characters to overcome those somehow and move forward. And sometimes my novels are bittersweet, like there's not necessarily you don't necessarily end up with the ending that you want, and certainly you've seen sequels for some of those.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, The Sun in Her Eyes is probably one that the ending wasn't what you expected it to be.
yeah, yeah. I mean that was like a different book to anything that I've ever written before, because the person who you're kind of rooting for turns out to be maybe not the person that you want to be rooting for.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. You all the way through it's like, "Oh, he's really no, 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 he's not actually."
yeah. Oh dear, yeah. Certainly, there's a whole other universe happening out there.
Yeah, and that's I
These
mean, this that brings it back round to Only Love Can Hurt Like This with the emotion and the emotive characters, because you really feel for Ren and Anders and everyone else in the book, because they are going through so many things, but they're still having to function. And then there's obviously the chemistry and Ren's concern for her sister with Jonas getting too close to him because she's married, and the relationship with her parents and her ex-fiance. It was lovely to see that there, though she was so angry at him, she was kind of not closing herself off to emotion, but she was
Yeah.
matter of fact about it.
Yeah, I think she can see that he's, ultimately her fiance is a good guy, and it wasn't his fault that he fell in love with someone else. Like sometimes, and I have always written books. I've often written books from when it's the other way around. And there's just a little snippet on my Instagram page of Gemma Whelan reading a section from the book, and it was this whole idea of, you see it on the films and you see them kind of like, the heroine sort of with a man who doesn't really understand them, and you're kind of rooting for her to get with a guy who really does. And I just sort of thought, imagine being the other way around, imagine being the woman whose partner actually gets with the girl, and you're aware that actually his true love is this girl, not you. And you'd be that person who's there sort of hurting and full of the pain, and so that's Ren's story basically. She's the one who is not, the one, for
Yeah,
her fiance, but she kind of understands it too, because ultimately, yeah, she understands that he has to follow his heart.
yeah, because if she stood in the way of it, would that be making her feel any better? Yes. Would that be
Yeah,
making her feel any better? So you're
yeah,
going, on a book tour around Waterstones, I believe, in the
yeah,
country. So
yes.
what dates can people see you?
Well, check out my Instagram page. I've got all the dates on there. The first event is on the 29th at Blue Water. That's just a signing, so you can just turn up from 12 o'clock at Waterstones Blue Water. Be lovely to see lots of people there. And then after that, the next one is Birmingham, 2nd of May, and then 3rd of May, London Piccadilly. And then I'm also going to Manchester and Liverpool. So there may be other dates in the summer. These are kind of like where we had the most demand, and where the stores kind of like came through. So I've had quite a lot of readers saying, "What about Scotland? And what about the Southeast?" And I'm like, "I would love to go there. Believe me." I've sort of said to my publisher, "I will go anywhere." But ultimately, they have to work with the Waterstones and the ones that want to hold events and things like that. So
Absolutely,
that's where we'll start, and yeah, hopefully see lots of people at those locations.
and that's next week, isn't it? The 20 oh god, it is. It's the
Yeah,
29th
29th
next week.
on Saturday. Yep. So not far at all.
And of course, the book comes out on the 25th in the US, which is next Tuesday, and next Thursday in the UK.
That's right. Yep.
So
And Wednesday in Germany. Like this is the first time
wow.
I've had my book simultaneously published in Germany. So that'd be really nice. Normally they run about 3 or 4 years behind. So super exciting.
Translations take time.
They do. Yeah. Stop this one.
No, it's taken a I suppose because the run up has been longer this time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's another reason for doing, having that space between delivering the book and having it come out. It gives everybody behind the scenes a bit more time to make things happen. And, just the fact that I've got a US release this time, that's really exciting. That would not have happened if I had stuck to my original publication schedule, because the US likes to have books well in advance, so that's happened this time around, and they're, signed up for a few more books too. So it's quite exciting.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for coming on and talking with me. And I cannot wait to get my copy of the book on Thursday. Even though I
Oh,
have read it, I'm going to probably read it again.
oh, lovely. Thank you. Well, thanks so much. It's been so nice to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And as I said, next week the book is coming out, so don't forget to get your copy.
Ah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers. Take care.
Bye. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening, and thank you again to my guest, the author Paige Toon. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family? And please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the other podcatchers where you listen. You can follow me on Twitter at being_bookish and on Instagram at beingbookishpod, or you can check out my website, beingbookish.co.uk. Well, I've got a lot to get ready for next week, and many new books are calling me. So until next time, this is me saying farewell.